Second and 20. And Weese to throw. Gets it away, and it's intercepted. Intercepted by Harris down to the 10, to the 5. The Seahawks will have first and goal.
This is an absolute disaster. The Broncos are starting Norris Weese at quarterback, and he's had his struggles so far this season. In Week 2 against the Rams, he only completed 44% of his passes, and he didn't throw a touchdown pass. And the following week against the Falcons, he threw no touchdowns and an interception. But this is the worst of them all. On this day, September 23rd, 1979, he's thrown 2 picks. He's got a passer rating of 46.6. And his team is down 34-10 midway through the third quarter against the division rival Seattle Seahawks. For the former 4th-round pick, things couldn't be going too much worse than they already are. For head coach Red Miller, his hands are tied at this point. He has to make a switch. He has to bench his quarterback and put in the backup. What's about to happen over the next 2.5 minutes of game time is nothing short of remarkable, because in the span of an instant, the Broncos are about to get right back in it. This is the story of the greatest performance off of the bench in NFL history. Now, before we talk about the performance, we need to talk about the man himself. We have to talk about the backup quarterback who came off of the bench and sparked this comeback. And that man is Craig Morton, at the age of 36 years old. Morton had a 19-year career in the NFL, and he threw for 183 touchdown passes. But despite all of that, if you hear the name, the first thing that probably pops into your head is Super Bowl 12, which was the first ever Super Bowl held in prime time. I made a video about that if you want to check it out. On that day, Morton was about as abysmal as you could possibly be. Against the Dallas Cowboys, he went 4 for 15, threw no touchdowns, 4 interceptions, and had a passer rating of 0.0. We need to put into perspective just how awful this is. In the history of the NFL, only one other quarterback has posted a passer rating of 0 in a playoff game on 15 or more pass attempts. And that was Otto Graham back in the 1953 NFL Championship between the Cleveland Browns and the Detroit Lions. I bring this up because in the third quarter of Super Bowl 12, Morton was benched for Norris Weese, who then immediately led a touchdown drive to cut Denver's deficit in that Super Bowl. Now, it didn't matter in the end, as Dallas won 27-10, but you could see some seeds being planted for a future quarterback controversy. And Morton's 1978 season wasn't that great either. It didn't help that in the opening game against the Raiders, literally his first game after that abysmal Super Bowl, the Broncos had 8 net passing yards. That's right, 8 net passing yards. That season, Morton had just one game where he threw more than 1 touchdown pass. He had a start against the Chargers in Week 6 where he went 0 for 7. He had a start against Pittsburgh where he went 3 for 9 with an interception and a passer rating of 11.6. After his struggles to start off the 1979 season, Red Miller named Norris Weese the starting quarterback. Now, Weese was a 4th-round pick from 1974 who had shown some promise before. He had that drive during Super Bowl 12. In his lone start during the 1978 season, he scored a passing and a rushing touchdown and helped Denver win 28-7. And during his final game of the 1978 regular season, where he relieved Morton, he threw 2 touchdown passes. He threw for 228 yards, and he posted a 152.2 passer rating. That's roughly 6 points shy of a perfect rating. So entering 1979, with Craig Morton now riding the bench, the storyline in Denver would be how Norris Weese would perform. The answer? Yeah, not good. I mentioned the stats earlier, but even though the Broncos were 2-1 after 3 games, they were squandering the talents of the Orange Crush defense. This defense was the only reason they were winning games at first. Through 3 weeks, they allowed 30 points, which was the second best total in the league, only behind the Miami Dolphins at 29. And of those 30 points, 7 of them can't even be contributed to the defense because the Rams scored a touchdown off of a fumble. Denver even shut out Cincinnati to open up the season. So that's good. The problem was that the offense had only scored 39 points. That's the 4th worst total in the league. When you're averaging 13 points per game, that's not a good sign at all, and it places a heavy burden on your defense. So this takes us to week 4 against Seattle. This game was a disaster. The Seahawks led 10-0 after the first quarter, they still led by 10 at the end of the half, and then led 34-10 midway through the third. They had built up a 24-point lead. And remember that this was under the 1979 rules, where the 2-point conversion did not exist. Today, a 24-point game is a 3-possession game, even if it may be hard to score 3 touchdowns and then successfully convert all 3 of the 2-point conversions necessary to tie it up. But in 1979, 24 points is a 4-possession contest. How did the Seahawks get that final touchdown to put them up 34-10? Weese threw this interception to Seahawks safety John Harris, which set Seattle up right near Denver's goal line, and Seattle scored on the very next play. Immediately after, you could see Craig Morton warming up on the sidelines. This offense wasn't getting it done. It hadn't been getting it done all season. But this was a disaster to end all disasters. It was the type of disaster that pretty much forced you to make a change. So Craig Morton came into the ballgame. And what Morton was about to do would be arguably the greatest performance off the bench in NFL history. Here we go.
Here he comes, Craig Morton.
Art Crowley bringing up church down as Morton comes on. Last faced the Los Angeles Rams in that Thursday night defeat. That is only playing time this season. Taking over for Norris Weese, went 5 for 11, intercepted once, and his fumble led to the winning score by the LA Rams.
At this point, you could hear the crowd cheering once they realized that Morton was going to the huddle. They had seen enough of Weese. It started off with a nice easy screen pass to Pro Bowl wide receiver and return man Rick Upchurch. Then, he found Haven Moses on the very next play down the field to set the Broncos up in Seattle territory. A beautifully executed play-action pass led to Morton finding Moses again open down the middle of the field on the next play. In just 3 plays, Denver had flipped the field, and they had set themselves up inside the red zone. This was followed by a quick pass to Upchurch, who did the rest and got Denver near the goal line. And now what you're about to see next is a beautiful play design and a little bit of NFL history.
Run outside earlier today. Now Morton on the bootleg, looking, and which one? Touchdown!
Tackle eligible on that play. Dave Studdard, the off tackle, was eligible. They set it up with a wide receiver so that the tackle was eligible. You know, he was covered all the way. I don't think they fooled the Seattle defense, but Morton found him with that great whip arm, and they got 6.
The man who caught that touchdown was the right tackle, Dave Studdard. This was the first catch and the first touchdown of his NFL career. In fact, it would be the only catch Studdard would make during that 1979 season. I've got to say, that's pretty impressive for a tackle to be able to dive down low like that and hold onto the football. On that drive, Morton went 5 for 5. He had led Denver down the field quickly, cutting it to a 34-17 game. Still a lot of work to do, but at the very least, he provided that spark off the bench that was necessary. But if Denver truly wants to get back into this game, they're going to need some help defensively. Seattle had scored more points so far in this one than Denver had allowed in their first 3 games combined. Fortunately for the Broncos, they got their stop, because on the very first play, Jim Zorn was intercepted by Bob Swenson. Now the Broncos had a short field to work with. Morton led the offense back on the field, and his first pass is this dime. However, this was ruled incomplete, even though Upchurch got both feet in. There was no instant replay back in 1979. If you want to hear more about the origins of instant replay, check out the video in the upper right corner. Morton's first incompletion on the day had a giant asterisk next to it. No worries though, because 2 plays later, Morton threw this beauty to Haven Moses.
Morton is 5 for 6 now. And he throws to Moses. Touchdown! Haven Moses! And the Broncos are right back in it.
And just like that, the Broncos were back in it. It was now a 34-24 ball game, Morton was 6 for 7 with 2 touchdown passes, and his one incompletion really wasn't an incompletion. The very next series, Denver's defense forced a 3-and-out. Mile High erupted. They could sense that the tide was turning. And these senses were heightened after punter Herman Weaver shanked this one. Weaver was a pretty solid punter throughout his 11-year career. Just a few years earlier in 1975 as a member of the Detroit Lions, he averaged 42 yards per punt, which was the second best average in the league that season. So for him to shank this one was seemingly fate. Denver was practically starting this drive in field goal range with momentum on their side. And literally on the very first play, Morton found Upchurch on this throw.
Double pump, he whips one down. Touchdown! A spectacular catch by Upchurch, but a penalty marker is down. There is a flag on the play.
In literally 2.5 minutes of game time, the Broncos had gone from 34-10 down to 34-31 down. They had made it a ball game. On Craig Morton's first 3 drives, he was 7 for 8 with 118 yards and 3 touchdown passes. And again, his one incompletion was really a completion that if instant replay existed, would have never been ruled incomplete. On the next drive, Morton would make a few key passes, set the Broncos up at the goal line, and halfback Rob Little punched it in from a yard out to give Denver the lead. On Morton's first 4 drives of the game, he erased a 4-possession deficit and gave the Broncos the lead. Denver would wind up winning the game 37-34. Craig Morton would finish 11 for 16 with 178 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, and a passer rating of 145.3. Considering the circumstances, it was arguably the best outing of his 19-year career. In just 2 minutes and 34 seconds, the Broncos had made magic happen. Jim Sacamano, who worked in public relations for a long time with the team, said that the old press box at Mile High was shaking. And this win turned out to be an absolutely critical one, as Denver got the final wildcard spot with a 10-6 record. Seattle was 9-7. This 24-point comeback would wind up being the difference between Seattle making the postseason and Seattle missing out. The Seahawks have been around for over 40 years. To this day, this remains the biggest blown lead in franchise history. Regarding the Broncos, in their history spanning roughly 60 years, this is tied for the biggest comeback in franchise history. As for Craig Morton, he would go back to the bench for a bit after this game, but would quickly find himself back in the starting role a few weeks later once Norris Weese suffered an injury. Morton would even serve as Denver's primary starting quarterback up until the 1981 season, and played his last game for the team in 1982 following a 19-year career. Weese would never play again after the 1979 season. Morton's heroic performance off the bench in just 2.5 minutes led the biggest comeback in franchise history and wound up being the deciding game to get Denver into the playoffs and keep Seattle out. His efforts off of the bench were the greatest performance in relief in NFL history.